Today on The Journey from Steve DeWitt, a lesson from 1 Timothy chapter 5.
Just because a woman is a widow doesn't mean that she automatically qualifies to be supported by the church. They must be destitute, they must be godly. But if they are both of those, then the church does have a responsibility to help them financially and to make sure that they're able to have their needs met.
Caring for the vulnerable reveals the heart of true faith. Welcome to The Journey. I'm your host, Tim Svoboda. And today, Pastor Steve highlights God's plan for supporting widows. We're discovering the Bible's guidance on family duties, congregational responsibilities, and how to show Christ-like compassion in our modern world. It's a powerful lesson on putting your faith into action. If you missed part 1, you can access the complete message online at thejourney.fm. Now, here's Pastor Steve DeWitt with a message titled, The Church, Its Widows, and True Religion.
There had always been problems in the church with how to show appropriate compassion to those that had needs, specifically to widows, and how to do that with impartiality. In the first century, a woman's financial support came from her husband, and after her husband died, it came from her children. So children were very important to a woman, not just because she loved them, but because they represented how she was going to be able to live when her husband died. And as we know, typically men die younger than women do, and there's all kinds of speculative reasons for that I'm not going to get into today. So in the first century, they did not have Social Security. They did not have life insurance payments. They did not have pension plans. There were no 401ks. They basically lived somewhat day to day, certainly harvest to harvest. And the provision for the long-term care of a widow was her family. That was God's plan, plan A. Either her kids or her extended family. Other than that, they had no means to live by. Now, the care of widows, and oftentimes grouped with widows, is orphans. The care of widows and orphans in the Bible has always been an indication of where someone's heart is really at. So here's the principle, friends. When God's love is shed abroad in our hearts as Christians, which if we don't say that that's what it means to be a Christian, then we're missing something. God's love is in us. He has given His love to us. His love fills our hearts. We can know that His love is in our hearts when we are expressing love to people in the same way that He showed love to us, which is people that we get nothing from, materially. And that's why the way that you care for widows and orphans has always been an indicator of where your heart really is at. It's true religion. Now, what are we to do as a church? What was the church at Ephesus to do? We begin in verse 3 now, chapter 5. Give proper recognition to those widows who are really in need. But if a widow has children or grandchildren, these should learn, first of all, to put their religion into practice by caring for their own family and so repaying their parents and grandparents, for this is pleasing to God. The widow who is really in need and left all alone puts her hope in God and continues night and day to pray and to ask God for help. But the widow who lives for pleasure is dead even while she lives. Give the people these instructions too, so that no one may be open to blame. If anyone does not provide for his relatives, and especially for his immediate family, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. Some pretty strong language, isn't it? So you can see here that he continues to talk about widows, in fact, all the way through verse 16, but there are two different situations in view. In verses 3 through 8, he's talking about widows that the church should support financially. Who are they and what should we do? In verses 9 through 16, he is talking about widows that the church should enlist for ministry help. And that is a very helpful As I came to this passage, I've never studied this passage before, and it always kind of confused me. But once you see that distinction, then it kind of becomes clear. So, let's talk then about which widows is the church to support. And we find there's really two qualifications. First of all, they are widows that are truly in need. We would say destitute. Destitute widows. Look at verse 3. Give proper recognition to those widows who are really in need. Now, proper recognition in the NIV misses a little bit what the NASB and the King James helps to draw out, is that it means honor, certainly loving honor, but we're to honor even and love our enemies, so that goes without saying. But it really has in view financial support. The same word we find in verse 3 for give proper recognition is used in verse 17 of this chapter for financial support of teaching elders. Same word. So we have a financial recognizing that is in view in this. Notice then that the church is not called to indiscriminately give money to widows. This is not a free handout, anybody who wants it can get it kind of situation. Not at all. We are only to support those who truly need it. And need it there meaning not needing it to upgrade their channels on their cable, but needing it to live, needing it to survive. They have no other means of support, no family who is willing to do so. The second qualification is that they are to be godly women. They are to be godly women. Look at verse 5. The widow who is really in need, okay, well, it's based on verse 3. Who is that widow? She is left all alone. She puts her hope in God and continues night and day to pray and to ask God for help. Okay? The widows that are truly in need are those that have put all of their hope on God to meet their need. And they express that putting all their hope on God by praying, he says here, day and night. An example of this kind of woman would be Anna. Remember Anna, who day and night, 50 years roughly, a widow, and she would pray in the temple, and then she got to hold Jesus, of course, after Simeon. It's a great story there in Luke chapter 2. Godly widows deserve our support. They are contrasted here with those who live for pleasure, he says. These are dead, and the idea there is spiritually dead, by living for themselves instead of living for God. Don't support them. Don't support them. Support the godly widows. So again, the church is not to be just indiscriminate with what they do and who they support. Just because a woman is a widow doesn't mean that she automatically qualifies to be supported by the church. They must be destitute, they must be godly. But if they are both of those, then the church does have a responsibility to help them financially and to make sure that they're able to have their needs met. Let's talk about this in the American church because the culture today is much different. We have job opportunities here. We have the Social Security system today. So we have these things, and sometimes it's hard to exactly know, but let's not miss the point that we need to look for opportunities. That's the admonition here. Look for opportunities to put your religion into practice, he says, and to help those who cannot help themselves. Do that. I think a more immediate application for our church would be this, that we have a number of widows in our church. We have wonderful widows in our church, many of them, who have a lot to offer. And yet my observation as the pastor here is that oftentimes they sort of get a little bit lost in the shuffle. Do you know what I'm saying? I mean, put yourself maybe in their shoes. This isn't true for all of them, but oftentimes our identity is with who who we're married to or with our family. Many of you, most of you are sitting with your families right now. Why do you do that? Because you're identified as the Bohms. So here we have the Bohms sitting right here in the second row. They didn't have a discussion today. Hey, do you want to sit together? Okay. No, they just do that. Why? We identify with our families. But a widow or a divorcee or a single woman doesn't have that. I think a very practical application for us as a church is to look beyond our immediate group, our family or our friends, and to see those that have particular relational needs and to try to meet them. And sometimes it doesn't take a lot of work to do that. It just means being included. I think it'd be great. I wish everybody in our church would go visit another church. And what I mean by that, you're all going, well, I've never heard that in a church before. What I mean by that is when you visit another church, you recognize how people feel when they're here at our church and they don't know anybody. Or maybe they don't have an identifiable group. It gives you a whole new awareness. Man, it really feels kind of weird to be here. And I think that it would really help us as a church to reach out to some of these people, especially to those that we know. We know that a widow longs to have relationship with people. How might you practically apply this passage? How could your family practically apply the passage? I grew up in our home. On Christmas Eve every year we would go caroling. And we would always go caroling to like the widows in the church. And I think one of the reasons is that they would be the only people that could tolerate the DeWitt family singing, because we're not exactly known for our musical ability, and not at all, in fact. But we would go, of course, and we're going to go and we're going to minister to this, maybe an elderly couple or a widow or whoever it is. And so we sing a couple songs, they have us in, you have Christmas cookies together and all that, and then you leave. And you just see there's the widow, thank you for coming, or she's crying at the door and all that. And here you are, you've gone to minister to them, and guess what you feel like when you leave? You do. You do. It is more blessed to give than to receive. It really is. How might you apply the admonition to reach out to people who can't meet their own needs? Relationally, materially, whatever it might be. How could your family do that? Maybe adopt a widow as your own. Have her over for Sunday lunch. She'd love it. She'd love it. Now, I think there is also an implicit admonition to the widows in our church that I'd like to mention. Let me encourage you to be in the body life of the church. You may struggle with feeling like you're lost in the shuffle or something like that. You're not. You just feel that way. There are wonderful people here that would be wonderful relationships for you, but those happen by spending time together. So be involved with things in the church. And you will meet people that can then reach out to you and love on you and you on them, and you can have that kind of relationship. It's a sad thing when people sort of feel like, I don't have a family to go, or I don't have this or that, so I'm just going to kind of come, and then I'm going to leave, and I wonder why nobody's nice to me. Well, they don't know you. So a little bit of reaching out on the one side and a little bit of reaching out on the other side, I think would produce some wonderful relationships in the church and a context by which we could help meet the needs of the congregation. You can feel free to say, that's a good idea, or just amen, All right, moving on, because we have a lot of verses today. Now, why would Paul put a limit on who the church should support? It would seem that in true benevolence, you just support everyone. Why would he do that? The reason is that church support is God's backup plan. It is not plan A. The church supporting widows is not plan A. It has always been God's plan that families should take care of their own. Look at verse 4 again. But if a widow has children or grandchildren, these should learn, first of all, to put their religion into practice by caring for their own family. And here's that interesting word, repaying their parents and their grandparents. For this is pleasing to God. Verse 7, give the people these instructions so that no one may be open to blame. If anyone doesn't do this, he says, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. This is pretty strong language here. What do you mean, I'm denying the faith? I still believe Jesus is Lord and Savior. I just don't want to spend time with my mom. Oh, what does it mean to know the love of Jesus Christ? When God's love gets in here, God's love gets expressed out here. God loved me when I was an orphan and a widow spiritually, which means now that I have God's love here, I'm empowered to love those who have nothing to offer to me. And God expects us, Christians, listen, God expects us to take care of our families. He expects that. It is a blight on any family when a father or a mother or a grandfather or a grandmother is ignored and their needs go unmet. The Bible here says that when we do this, when we love them, we are actually repaying them. And the idea there is these are people that brought us into the world. They met our needs. They wiped our bottoms. They wiped our noses. They fed us for all these years. And now they have needs. And guess what? You get to love them now. And he goes on to say this pleases God. It pleases God when we do that. And verse 8 contains this very strong word that if someone doesn't do this, they are worse than an unbeliever. Now, why would he say that? Does this mean that they have actually lost their salvation or whatever you want to say? I don't know. You'd have to say if somebody doesn't love their own family, are they even really saved, wouldn't you? And I think that's kind of what he's getting at. Plus, even in the culture, the pagan culture of the day, it was expected that families took care of their own, that sons take care of their mom. That was the common expectation. And Paul here says, if somebody claims to know the love of Christ, they claim to follow the example of Jesus Christ, and they don't even take care of their family, they're not even doing what pagans do, and they don't have that example. In fact, that guy, he's worse than an unbeliever, he says. It's very strong language. There's no way to water it down here. So plan A is for families to care for their own and to meet their needs. Verse 16, if any woman who is a believer has widows in her family, she should help them and not let the church be burdened with them, so that the church can help those widows who really are in need. The church is not to be unnecessarily burdened. You can't just drive up and drop your mom off at the church, okay? Like a dog at the fire station. Families take care of their own is the principle. And I know with this, some of you right now are going, boy, he doesn't recognize the issues. And I don't recognize all the issues. I know that they're there. Another big difference that we have today is that with medical care, we have lifespans going much longer than they did in the first century. I mean, in those days, you didn't expect mom to live that long. You didn't expect dad to live that long. Now we're into, I think the average lifespan for a woman is nearly 80 years. And you have health care issues and all of that. And I don't understand all those issues. I recognize that they're there. I'm not going to answer all those questions today, but I'm going to say this, that God expects us to take care of our families. And someday, each of us will stand before God and give an account. Make sure that that account that you give is a good one. Treat your family now in a way that someday you'll be glad that you did it that way. It's a complex issue. But God calls it true religion. True religion. So I just want to visualize what is he teaching in this passage, if you go to the next slide. He's saying that for a godly widow, her first plan, of course, is to meet her own needs. And today, again, we have provisions for that, even in the social services of our government. Her own money, saved up, whatever it might be, but she should meet her own needs first. The next step, though, is that once the first level's gone, the next level is that her family is to seek to meet her needs. And once, for some reason, that's not there, or the family's gone, or whatever happens, then the church steps in and helps to meet the needs of the godly widow who prays and has given all her hope to God. Now, as a practical matter, let me just add this. You will be fortunate if your children treat you as well as you treat your parents. You recognize that? You will be fortunate if your children treat you as well as you treat your parents. Therefore, as a practical matter, I would suggest setting the bar pretty high, because those little eyes are watching. And one day, you're going to be the one feeble. You're going to be the one without means. And they're likely to treat you exactly the same way. So give them a good example. In the years ahead, you'll be glad that you did. All right, so that's the ministry to widows, compassion ministry to widows who have needs. Verse 9 transitions to a different widow ministry. And now he starts talking about widows that are enlisted to the church for ministry assistance. Look at verse 9. No widow may be put on the list of widows unless she is over 60. Not that Paul is saying that's old today, I just want to emphasize that. Has been faithful to her husband and is well known for her good deeds, such as bringing up children, showing hospitality, washing the feet of the saints, helping those in trouble, and devoting herself to all kinds of good deeds. Now you notice the words there, it says put on the list, which is like, what list are we talking about? You might think it's the list of support from the previous verses, but then that doesn't make sense because the qualifications are different in this for the list than they are for the support. And it also would seem to indicate that the church would have no obligation to help some widow who's under 60 years old, even if she doesn't have a family, and that doesn't make sense either. Further, we have evidence in the early church that there was it's not an office, but there were widows that were formally assisting the church. Some kind of a list, and we don't know a lot, but we see that in extra biblical materials regarding the early church. So that there may have been some kind of formal relationship. These may have been the godly widows from the previous verse, we don't know, but the church would benefit from their ministry. So some kind of ministry where they were giving themselves to helping the church. And the qualifications we find are seniority, they must be over 60, marital fidelity, they must have been faithful to their husband or husbands throughout their life, and godliness. They were to be known for good deeds, which they list here as bringing up children, showing hospitality, the word there means literally a friend of strangers, washing the feet of the saints, humble, willing service to the flock, and doing good deeds. And women, let me just tell you, this is an excellent portrait right here of what a godly woman is. An excellent one. The kind of woman who, as a widow, is a tremendous asset to any ministry. Because there are things, and we just recognize this, don't we? There are situations where an older woman who has a life of credibility behind her, where she can step in and she can handle situations because she has respect. Something that a younger woman would never be able to do yet. She can do it. And somehow the early church recognized that and began to enlist these godly widows into some kind of formal ministry in the church. And this passage implicitly exhorts every woman here to live this way.
You're listening to The Journey with Steve DeWitt and the second part of a message titled, The Church, Its Widows, and True Religion, from our study in 1 Timothy. To access this lesson or the complete series, visit thejourney.fm. Or even easier, download our podcast. Just search your favorite podcast platform for The Journey with Pastor Steve DeWitt. Well, here at The Journey, our mission is clear, to help you understand and apply God's Word in your daily life. Through our radio broadcasts, digital resources, and written materials, we provide solid biblical teaching that's both accessible and practical. This month, we're shining a spotlight on an extraordinary book that embodies our mission. It's called Finding God in the Story of Amazing Grace, a vivid exploration of how God's amazing grace can change the course of both history and individual lives. This book will take you to 18th century Britain to walk alongside William Wilberforce and John Newton. Through their eyes, you'll witness the power of grace unfold, from the composition of the beloved hymn, Amazing Grace, to the monumental end of the British slave trade. But this book doesn't just recount history. It reveals how God's grace manifests and triumphs in our everyday struggles. Your support of The Journey not only keeps our mission alive, but also brings you this inspiring book to your doorstep. With your gift of any amount, Finding God in the Story of Amazing Grace can be yours. Just call 844-7-JOURNEY. That's 844-756-8763. Or visit thejourney.fm. And while you're on our website, be sure to subscribe to our email list to receive encouraging content and other updates from Pastor Steve DeWitt and The Journey. To sign up, just simply enter your name and email in the blue box at the bottom of our homepage. Again, that's thejourney.fm. Well, I'm Tim Svoboda. Be sure to come back tomorrow when Pastor Steve concludes a message titled, The Church, It's Widows and True Religion. That's Wednesday on The Journey. Today's program was produced and furnished by Bethel Church in Crown Point, Indiana.